Welcome everybody. It's the IFLAPAC Open Webinar on Digitization number 5. It's about digitizing in the fields, an introduction with Sam van Schaik from the British Library and myself, Tomasz Gruszkowski from the National Library of Poland. And Sam will be second to present. I'll be talking first about the usual way of getting proper images during digitization projects. And then I will try to put up some crazy or less crazy ideas how to do things when you cannot do it and the luxury way. So this webinar is the 5th in the series. I'll put link to the place where all the recordings land and can be accessed. And yeah, while digitizing, while doing photography or scanning if it's possible, in general, it's the question of beautiful versus faithful. Many of the objects we digitize are beautiful, but it is not our duty to enhance their image, but to remain faithful to the state that they are in at present. So, first thing I would like to talk about is the color fidelity, about the ways to preserve the image of the original as close to the original as possible. Talking about reproduction photography, you can start with the light that is falling on the object and gets reflected off it and gets to the camera. I'll use the word camera even if I mean any other device meant for capturing the most of the times digital version of the analog object. Light has different properties. It has intensity, whether it's bright or dark, in the place where you do digitization. It has color temperature. The light of a candle is much warmer than the lamp of many light bulbs. It can be uniform, that meaning that all the parts of the objects are evenly lit. It has the white balance, which can be measured. White balance meaning whether the picture you take will be greenish or bluish or reddish or without influence from the other colors than usually white background. So this is beauty, an example of ways of doing digitalization. This is a picture in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. It's a very famous picture by Rembrandt, and it has been recently digitized for a great amount of budget. But it was digitized very, very closely to the original. How did they do it? We can see it in one of the pictures that has been put on the website of the Dutch National Museum. If we get closer to the dog that is somewhere here in the shadows, you'll see a picture that is available at the website of the Dutch Rijksmuseum. This is the picture. You can see the dog, and at the bottom you see some strange things. These are called targets. The one on the right is meant not to contain any other colors than black printed on white. The one on the left contains 144 spots of color, which are printed in a very accurate way. What's the beast? It is called the digital color checker, and it contains spots of different colors and of different shades of gray. It is meant to be very accurate. It is possible to test it with some tools that are freely available or not freely available, but anyway, they can be, all those spots can be measured, and on the basis of that, you can make sure that the picture you're taking is correct. There is one issue: what to do if you don't have a target to check all those parameters. What to do if you cannot afford such a target, because it costs something like 400 euro probably. I have an example of a thing I did recently. I came across a handkerchief stained with coffee, and it has writing on it: "Dublin is full of joys," and it has a make-believe autograph of James Joyce, famous Irish writer. And so I decided that it's a very valuable handkerchief, and I took a picture of it. But I didn't have the targets to check the values of white on the picture. I took a picture without really measuring light. In one kind of light, it is bluish and greenish, as you see. In other, it's more violet. So how do I know if the picture, which color of the spot is true to reality? It's quite difficult if you don't have one of the targets, like you see on the left of the handkerchief, the one with the gray fields, which should not contain any color. If you measure their values in some software that is available even for free, you can make sure that the white balance and that the temperature of light used are okay. If you don't have them, what to do? Well, I'm in a Library Congress, so there are different exhibitions here. So I came across an idea to take the picture of the handkerchief with some colorful bookmarks. I can make sure that I take those bookmarks if I cannot take the original handkerchief with me, and then check the real values of the colors with the comparison of the value of colors in the digital image. And in that way, I could find out if the picture was taken in some way resembling the original color. Apart from color fidelity, there is spatial fidelity. There are distortions which are being introduced by the lenses of the cameras you're using. It's difficult to tell the size of the object if you do not have a measure put next to it, so you should remember about that. And there are issues related to resolution of the camera you're using. If you have a target, that is one of the targets used for measuring resolution, then it's quite easy to find out whether the camera you're using is giving you desired resolution and whether the images you take are sharp. It's done by the software. You cannot do it really yourself. It's done by quite a complicated algorithm. And the target itself is, again, very expensive. What to do if you do not have a target of that kind and you don't have access to the software that measures resolution and the way the image is, whether the image is sharp or not. Well, I thought of taking a picture of a note. Banknotes usually have very minute details. You can compare the pictures taken from a different distance, which means if you use a camera, that they are different resolution. The closer you get, the higher is the resolution. But then, of course, as you can probably, I hope you can see in my picture, the picture on the left shows the images smaller, but they seem sharper. The picture on the right shows the notes closer to the camera, therefore with bigger resolution, higher resolution, but it does not seem as sharp as the picture on the left. Apart from resolution, I have to go back in my presentation, there is distortion, geometrical distortions. Many lenses distort the image, like a barrel on the left side or like a pincushion on the right side. How can you check that? It's quite easy. You can print out a page of dots or of lines. Take a picture of that with your camera. And if the lines are straight, if the dots are aligned in the proper way, then there is little distortion, geometrical distortion for that fact. And the images you take later will be of better quality. How about the size of the objects? Well, keep the camera at a fixed distance so that all the pictures come with the same resolution, which means the objects are also photographed at the same size, and put a measure next to an object so that you know that actually this handkerchief is around 12 centimeters horizontally, or 4.5 inch probably. I am done with my I'd say creative solutions. If they are working for you, let me know. And I'm giving the word to Sam.
Thank you, Tomasz. Just going to move to slideshow. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks. I will talk about digitization in different circumstances in the context of the Endangered Archives program now, and overlapping with some of the themes that Tomasz just talked about. But I will start, if this works, with a video of perhaps it's one of our current projects, and perhaps one of the less difficult circumstances for digitization. It's only 3 minutes, but it'll give you an idea of how projects that we fund at EAP work in practice.
It works with no sound.
You have no sound. In fact, the sound on this video is just a bit of music, so it's largely for the visual, and I can speak a little about this. So this is a current project, one of our larger ones based in Laos, and so in case you can't hear, it's the Buddhist archives at Luang Prabang, and it's a major series of collections across different monasteries in Laos. And these are some of the materials that they're working on. So I'll speak a bit about all of these activities in a moment when the video is finished. These are palm leaf manuscripts, by the way, so you'll see here a very specific way of conserving and preparing these for photography, which is through inking them. And it's not something we'd recommend for other kinds of material, but it's specific for this kind of inscribed palm leaf manuscript. And here at the end of the video, which was made by the monastery themselves, they're also showing the activities which the project allowed them to carry out in terms of spreading the word about the manuscripts and spreading the kind of ability to local people to read and appreciate them. So that was one of the projects that we've recently funded out of many hundreds now over the last, well, 18 years. So the Endangered Archives Programme, very briefly, we give out grants every year. There's a funding round that is, there's a call in September, and our panel meets to decide on funding decisions in April of each year. So by endangered, we mean material that's at risk of loss or decay through various kinds of things, which can be environmental, can be political, can be simply neglect or lack of ability to preserve the material. And when we say archives, we have a very broad definition, which includes both kind of documentary archives, but also pictures, audio, manuscripts, like we just saw, newspapers, and so on. So I'll just say a little bit about how we decide, because this isn't specifically about the digitization, but in a way, because we've been funding projects for so long, we've ended up with a very sort of clear idea of what works for digitization projects in the field, and that's how our panel makes its decisions about who to fund. So three main things: the content of the archive itself, that is whether it's endangered and valuable and rare, the team, whether it looks like a team that can do the work, and the plan itself, which is includes often travel, equipment, which I'll talk more about, and training and capacity building, and finally, whether there's a realistic budget. So the way a project works is this little flowchart that I made here, where at the left there's us, EAP, at the British Library. Then at the top there's the project lead, who's the person who applies to us and then who runs the project. And they have to have a host institution, which could be a university, a library, anywhere that's able to take the money from us and pay it out to the project. And then the archival partner, which is another institution in the country, it might be where the archive is, or it might just be nearby, but they should be able to help and to be able to take copies of the digital images so that they're always available in the country. And finally, really importantly, the custodians, the people who own or look after the material itself. So all of these are the kind of cast of an EAP project. And for an example, here's one recent project in Sri Lanka. And as you can see, this is how it appears on our website. So we give details of who's the project lead, what's the host institution, the archival partners, and also how much we awarded. So this is a small project here at £11,160. We call these pilot projects. They tend to be kind of more experimental, going into an area to see what's possible and digitizing a smaller amount of material. Really important for all projects which are doing digitization is making sure they have permission from the people who are responsible for the material itself. So, I mean, this is something that I think applies to anybody planning to do a digitization project like this. Make sure that the people that you're talking to, if it's not your own material, if it's somebody else's, really know what you are doing, plan to do, and intend to do with the digital images as well. So if you've got an open access project, then make sure they're aware of that their material is going to be freely available and reusable. So we have a form, which I'm showing here, which we give to our project applicants, and they have to take it to the people who hold the material, and they have to get that signed. So we're clear that they know exactly what's going to happen in the project, and they're happy about it. And this is really important, because if this isn't done at the start, then the project can go completely awry when the owners of the material say, well, they're not actually happy with it going online, for example. So the stuff itself, I'll just give you a few examples. For example, here is a typical archival document from Malawi. And we also have manuscripts, for example, Arabic manuscripts from Jenne here, and periodicals, Urdu magazines. We've got slides here from a Tamil photography studio. And here we've got sound recordings from Estonia, Finland, and Hungary. So that's the whole range of material, almost. But we also have some even more unusual material for us as well, which is inscriptions. So an earlier project with inscriptions on rocks, and a recent one that we funded with inscriptions on water sluices in India. So this is all kind of archives as far as we're concerned, and as you can imagine, it all requires different kinds of digital equipment and processes. So in 2018, when EAP had already been going for 14 years, we published a guide to digitization in the field called Remote Capture, bringing together the experience of both EAP and people who'd worked on projects in the field, and giving advice, some general advice on a project like this, some of the things that I've just been saying, and also quite specific advice on what kinds of equipment to use. So that's all of the chapters, and I won't go into that in detail, but just to show you, it involves planning, equipment, standards of images, how to look after and handle the documents that you're working on, general workflow, and then advice about working, if it's not the country that you live in and are familiar with, how to work in that country in terms of communication, politics, and so on. So it's a general guide to running digitization projects in different parts of the world. And for example, some of the questions addressed here are whether to use a camera or a scanner. And I won't read this here, but this is just a text box from the book, taken directly from the book, which is advice about where scanners might be useful for doing digitization and where they're not. So some of our projects, when they apply to us, say they'll use scanners, but we can see if they're doing kind of archival books, then that might not be appropriate, because you have to flatten and possibly damage the spine of the book before the scanner will be able to take a good scan. So scanners are useful in some cases, but not in others. So in the book and in our projects, we also talk about APS cameras, full frame cameras, and mirrorless cameras. And here's an example of advice of how to put together a kit for an APS camera. So also including UV protection filters, spare batteries, spare chargers, because of course, for a lot of projects working in the field, there won't be a direct power supply where you're doing the digitization. So thinking ahead in terms of batteries is really crucial, actually. Also important before you start is to think about the setup. So two basic setups are used in our projects, and we talk about them here. The first is the copy stand, which is the sort of ideal one, and is usually for projects that are based in an institution already, where there's a room that can be set aside for photography. And here you can see it's a very stable setup with light coming from two sides, and a stand where the camera can be put above the item itself. The other way is a tripod, and this is of course cheaper, and it's also easier to use and set up in more diverse locations. So if you happen to be working in a living room or a bedroom, this can be set up there. So most of our projects, I would say, tend to use a tripod. So here are some examples. This is in Mali. You can see here the tripod with a small light on either side of the camera, and you can also see the black card and the color checker below where the image is being taken. And here, for larger things, you can see it's a higher tripod with a camera quite high up. And you can see they're using 2 desk lamps for the lights in this case, actually 3 desk lamps. And it's in the archival storage area itself because they didn't have a dedicated area to do the photography. And this, different again, is a project in Bhutan going through around the Buddhist monasteries where their preferred method was, as you can see, a kind of vertical setup where they set the cameras on tripods and put the manuscript pages vertically, resting on pins, on some back pins, and took them in that way. This is not really our sort of preferred way of doing it, but it worked for this material, for this project. And another case where you have the camera facing towards the material is here, where it's quite a different kind of material, and I'm missing the EAP project number there, but I can fill that in later. And you can see it needs to face the walls of the temple murals in this case. So a different kind of material can require a different setup from the basic recommendations that we give. We also try to update our book with very specific costed equipment lists. So when people are planning a project, they've got an idea of how much to budget for their camera and their setup. And so we obviously have to update this, and it's not part of that main digital copy of remote capture that I showed you. It's what we call our digital appendices, which are found on the website along with the main book. And our most recent one is from 2021, as you can see here. So, for example, this is from the 2021 digital appendix by Patrick Sutherland, and it's got some specific setups. This is just one of them, using a Nikon D500 camera and talking about the advantages of this. So we try to give a range of possibilities from relatively lower costs to if you've got a bit more money. And of course, when you have more money, then you can spend on equipment that might be more rugged, keep out dust, and last longer. So one thing that we say to keep in mind is if you're planning a digitization project that lasts as long as 2 years, then it would be a false economy to have a cheaper camera that's not going to last 2 years. So it's worth thinking about the length of the project as well when you're looking at the equipment that you're going to buy for it. So this is the Endangered Archives Programme website, and I'm going to show this to you because one of the things that we also need to advise people on is how to produce consistent images. Some of the things that, the principles that Tomasz was talking about earlier, in fact. So everything that our projects produce goes on our website and goes on there together and is viewed using the same technology. So it's important from our point of view that people produce images to a certain standard, that they don't look too different from each other, and that they're basically readable and usable to people. So each project, as you can see here, has their own page on the website, and you can go in that way. You can search the website just for using general search terms for any kind of material, but you can also go via projects to look at all the material produced by that project. So these are the manuscript pages. This is for one project, EAP 1056. And then from there, you go to the Universal Viewer, which is the British Library's standard, based on IIIF technology. And you can see here, ideally, we have images that you can zoom into a really good magnification using all the advantages of the AAAF viewer, in which case it's great to have images that are well taken in good light and resolution. So also advice, this is also taken from remote capture. We've got advice on using a color chart, as Tomasz was talking about. And this is the simpler type that we recommend. It's still quite expensive, but really important in order to ensure consistency across your images. Again, if you're working over a project over a year or longer, then you're going to be working through different seasons, changes in light, equipment gets older, you might have a different photographer coming in. So you really need to ensure that over time also you're keeping the same kind of consistent standard for the images that you create. So color checker really helps, and also looking at, comparing your images from 6 months ago to one now, for example. So here we have just an example of mainly underexposed and overexposed images. There's also some other principles that some of those are kind of preferences, and some of them are, I think, generally applicable. So, for example, we're not keen if you have a book on images that take both pages. And this is partly for preservation reasons, because it's better to prop a book so you take one page flat and the other is at an angle, and then you turn it so the other page is flat. It's quite hard with books like this to take both pages and have them easily readable without kind of flattening the book in a possibly destructive way. Below that, you can see a newspaper, and here we're showing that our preference is for a black background. It makes it easier to see where the object itself ends and the background begins, and also it should be arranged so that it's kind of in line with the edges of the shot. Likewise, filling the frame is quite important, and it can be difficult to do this. There's some material that's odd shapes. In the video that we saw at the beginning, those palm leaf manuscripts, as you saw, were very long and very thin, so they don't fit easily into a standard kind of photographic frame. But it's important to fill as much as you can. And some projects we have had don't do this. Sometimes with those very large color checkers, the color checker can actually be bigger than the item itself and can take up far too much of the frame. So you've really got to think about a way to arrange the objects on the table so that the item itself is as much as much of the image as possible, because if it's not, then you're losing resolution. Every bit that's not the item is lost resolution. And finally, color balance. Again, Tomasz was talking about this, and this should be done regularly. It should be tested on the camera and on the monitor as well. One of the things to make sure is that the color balance of the monitor you're using doesn't sort of drift over time. So ideally, projects should do a color calibration of their monitor regularly, because it's quite possible. The two here, the cream and the pink image, look very different, but if it gradually happens on your monitor over time, you can even not notice that it's changed so much. Also really important, this is not the pictures per se, but if you don't take clear records of what you're photographing, then it's going to be very difficult to find it, display it, and for other people to search and find it afterwards. So we provide a listing template for metadata for images for all of the projects, and we get them to use the same one. For us, it's really important because they've got to appear on our website and they've got to go into the British Library's catalogue. So they've really got to be in the same standard. But I think as a general principle for anybody, the more you can record at the time that you're doing the photography, the less work you'll have afterwards in terms of sorting and finding things later. So some kind of sort of spreadsheet or even written pencil and paper records like this are really important as you go along. Some projects have kind of planned to do digitization first and then do this step later. We always discourage that because it's much harder to go back to a batch of hundreds of images and and try to remember what was what. So it's really good to do it at the same time. So an even more complicated flowchart, which I'm not going to go into in detail, but actually this is the whole sort of digital flow of an EAP project, where the project's digital produces images and catalog data. The data goes into the BL catalog, and the images go to two places. So they must produce TIFF images. And this is another principle that I think is important. With a digital camera, you can set it to usually capture JPEG or RAW images. And we say people must set that to RAW, and then from those they can convert them into TIFFs, which come to the digital archival storage of the British Library and the local archival partner. But if you do it as a JPEG, you'll create a compressed image which is already losing information as soon as it's created. So we archive those TIFF images into the British Library archive and into the local archive. And then we also create through automatic conversion into a cloud server JPEG images, which are then served onto the EAP website. So that's us. But I think for all projects, it's worth thinking about how you keep your images. If you have space, then TIFF images, lossless images, are really good if you can keep those archived. So if we're doing okay for the time, I have one more shorter video here, which is to show an EAP project in a less pleasant, less easy environment than the first one. So this is a project which I think we could say was digitizing in difficult conditions. There is no sound for this, so I'll just say a few words while it's running, and you can just see how these people set up their digitization station for this project, which is inside. They actually traveled to several different people's houses to work on their manuscript collections in their houses. So you can see that here, the photography is being done on a copy stand, actually, with the monitor right there, so people can see what they're doing as they set up the images. And you can also see two other people here. So one dealing with the files as they come in, as they're created, those raw camera files. And the other one's actually creating the cataloging metadata at the same time, so recording that cataloging information. So that's a really solid workflow in a kind of difficult space, but it's really, I think, impressive what they did. So that's our sort of EAP preferred way of working. We're quite flexible because we do have projects from all over the world, but at the same time, we do need them to produce something that we can ingest onto our own system and make available via the EAP website. So our recommendations, we try to keep flexible, or we try to hit a balance really between flexibility and ensuring consistency and the high standards of the images. And I hope this will be useful, whether anybody watching might think of applying to EAP, but also for anybody who is thinking of a digitization project in more difficult conditions. So thanks, that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm, as usual, when I meet EIP or see the results of your projects, I'm impressed. And I would be very happy to ask you a question if no one else wishes to go first. Questions could be put in chat, and probably you can just break in by turning your microphone on and speaking. If you have a question. But I see none. I have a quite technical question, namely, why do you still go with TIFF formats? Are you thinking of switching to RAW of any kind, or no? And if not, what?
No, well, so that's not really an EAP decision. It's more a sort of British Library image archiving decision. So TIFF is still the standard. And in fact, the library is just moving towards a new storage system called LibSafe, where everything ingested will be TIFF. So I think for the future, at least for the medium term, we'll remain with TIFF images as the standard for archiving. As I said, most of the cameras actually produce raw images, so in some ways it might be easier for the projects if they could just provide those. But we do ask them to convert to TIFF, so then we can ingest them into the library's archival storage immediately.
Okay.
Do you, Thomas, have any thoughts on whether one is preferable over the other?
We also have, at the National Library of Poland, have taken the decision to do the TIFF as archival format. But I quite regularly hear that conversion from RAW to TIFF is leaving out some information that could otherwise be preserved. But still, the TIFF is a format that is open, and it's not depending on the decisions of the producers of the cameras. So this is safer for the long-term preservation, definitely. Still, just wondering. But to follow up on that, you do explicitly exclude cameras that only do JPEG.
Yes, they would be excluded from the recommended equipment because, yeah, they wouldn't be able to produce the images in the format that we need them for EAP.
Okay. And then no other questions? Hello. I can go on asking questions for some time. The targets, are they mandatory or recommended?
Which do you mean by the targets?
The color checker, the color.
Yeah. Yes, they're recommended, not mandatory. So we have had projects using a similar one to the grid that you showed earlier. That's also okay. That was, or some of those projects are the ones that I mentioned where there's a problem with fitting enough of the item into the shot, because depending on the shape, the target can end up taking up too much of the shot and at the expense of the item itself.
And the first film from Laos, they were using how do you call them in English? Measures? No, they are
rulers. Yeah.
Rulers, just for alignment, or to also, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's mainly for alignment, actually, because with those palm leaves, it's very easy for the angle to be slightly wrong. But I mean, we don't say that people need to have like a centimeter measure in the image. I know some people think it's very useful with photography of documents because otherwise it's hard to see what sort of size of object you're looking at. But actually, I think in any case, in that case, I think they had them like this actually. So it's definitely about lining up the material for photography, which seems to work well for them.
Okay. I'm wondering. No, I'm not going to go on forever. I guess that our guests are quite speechless. No, they're probably not, but still. I see no questions coming in the chat, so I guess I will get back to my Congress. I really am in Dublin at the Congress.
Yeah.
So there are some more sessions today. It's ending today, so sorry for that.
Hope you can find some other good material for your photography, like the napkin.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, I had fun. And yeah, James Joyce is big in Dublin. I have also taken a picture of his monuments in one of the streets. Not a 3D reproduction of that, just a nice looking picture. So I will just switch for a second to the a reminder of the past webinars. And you will be more welcome in September to come back. And a very warm thank you go to Claire Maguire and representative of Project Muse, who has given out her little magnifying glass with the measure on it and the colorful papers. And this is the link to the place where all other previous webinars are available, and this one will be put there as well. I am very grateful to you, Sam, for your presentation and your presence here. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Tomasz.